The nation is jolted by yet another senseless killing, this one leaving church worshipers to wonder if they are indeed next on list of psychopaths. The eyes of Texas are upon a pair of issues that have caught the attention of the federal government. Hey, please, don't say the word secession, but do say the word preparation when it comes to that eventual Supreme Court hammer being dropped on Obamacare. And in telling it like it is, what light through yonder dumbing down window breaks? 'Tis the beginning of the fastest 60 minutes of news. I'm Ed Berliner, and this is The Hardline for Thursday, June 18th, 2015.
There's something particularly heartbreaking about a death happening in a place in which we seek solace and we seek peace.
This certainly is just it is an unspeakable tragedy. It is a tremendous loss of life. It is a tremendous loss to the community. It's a tremendous loss to the faith community. I believe the pastor was one of the individuals whose life was taken in this event, and so we will be looking to provide every support that we can.
Mother Emanuel Church and its congregation have risen before, from flames, from an earthquake, from other dark times, to give hope to generations of Charlestonians. And with our prayers and our love and the buoyancy of hope, it will rise again now as a place of peace. I've had to make statements like this too many times. Communities like this have had to endure tragedies like this too many times. We don't have all the facts, but we do know that, once again, innocent people were killed in part because someone who wanted to inflict harm had no trouble getting their hands on a gun.
Confirm that there is a subject in custody in relation to the shootings in Charleston from last evening. And of course, this moves us into a different phase of the investigation, which will be pursued as vigorously and with as complete cooperation as the apprehension of this individual.
One of the last places in the world one might expect gunfire, one of the oldest churches in America, a nighttime service where people seek to talk with God. In walks a 21-year-old man carrying a gun, and peaceful people find themselves meeting their maker much earlier than anyone would expect. In a nation where we are always seeking to stay ahead of the crazies, the killers, the ones who act with no seeming explanation, must we now turn our attention to places of worship? One facet of the multiple killings at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. So let's welcome back the former Assistant Director of the FBI Criminal Investigative Division, now President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, Ron Hosko. Ron, I thank you for joining us, and I wish we were not joined in such difficult times over what happened in South Carolina. But the words hate crime are immediately used when something like this happens, and certainly we hear that the suspect said, "I have to do it, you rape our women and you're taking over our country and you have to go." Doesn't it just become obvious at this point that that's exactly what we're dealing with?
Well, it does, Ed, and it does seem from all current appearances that this was motivated by racial hatred or some form of hate. It's a horrific event. As you said, this is the last place you'd expect this sort of violence to occur. And in ways, you know, with today's times, if we hear violence like this occurring, we immediately think ISIS. We don't think of a lone offender who's motivated by hate in this way. But it is a sign of our times. It's a sign of our country.
With the sign of the times, let's go to this fact. There are 19 active hate groups, including KKK chapters in South Carolina. So is it not fair to say that as the investigation starts to expand, they are going to be looking at these groups, and they need to be looking at them because these people do nothing more in many instances than just foster the hate and the killing of others because of skin color?
Well, that's right. The FBI and their state and local partners there will certainly be looking for a nexus to known hate groups or previously unknown hate groups in organizations and people to understand the drivers here, the motives here. You immediately think, regardless of the type of attack that the FBI gets involved with, you immediately have to think this is not a single isolated incident, that it might be tied to other related incidents that are yet to come. So they will always be vigilant to that and be looking for it.
Ron, does this not tell us that as we talk about terrorists in this country, that this is a facet of crime in America that needs specific attention and that we need to think about constantly? It is always with us, no matter how much we try and put it aside.
Well, absolutely. And we've heard much talk, certainly more since last summer and events in Ferguson and across the country as people have taken sides, opinions have been divided, particularly with regard to the police. But those opinions get hardened into concrete and sometimes they result in action. And here's a sad example of that potentially.
I've only got about 35 seconds left here, so let me just point this out. People will say, shouldn't someone like this have been on police radar? That's so easy to say, Ron, because he did have a record, but you can't put everybody with a simple arrest record under the kind of observation you would need to keep them from doing something like this, can you? It's impossible.
It is absolutely impossible. I know my former organization tries to look at these factors, try to prioritize subjects. They're doing that on a daily basis, but somebody could have that call to action in moments, much like we saw in Boston recently, and that is difficult to predict and difficult to cover.
And the FBI will now have a certain look into this, and they will try to find out a lot more about this young man's past. They will be digging deep for the next couple of weeks here to see if indeed there is any sort of connection whatsoever. Ron, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope the next time we get to do it under better circumstances, but let's just tell people that these are the kind of things that we cannot expect, and we must continue to be vigilant. Ron Hosko, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ed.
Hate may have motivated this, but hate is not going to win. And it won't win if we stick together and get something good to come out of this. And that's just had to come. Just had to be here.
The South Carolina shooting has churches across America on edge. Within hours after the arrest of a suspect, there was news of a bullet hole being found in a Memphis, Tennessee church. Now the fear is churches may need to arm themselves, especially predominantly black churches, who could be an easy mark for another deranged killer. We are joined by senior pastor at Hope Christian Church in Maryland, founder and chairman of High Impact Leadership Coalition, Bishop Harry Jackson Jr. Bishop, thank you so much for joining us. And let me just first of all say that we are all as a nation very sad what has happened here. This is a terrible time in our nation's history. But from the church aspect here, do you have a fear that we are now reaching a time where the crazed killers out there are going to start to target black churches?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of violence this summer unless we take positive action and something happens to begin to allay fears. I believe this is like 9/11 in a social sense. It's a time where in South Carolina, folks need to come out, black, white, brown, Asian, and go to the funeral, support these folks who have passed, to let people in the community know this is not the American dream. We don't do this in America. We want a different kind of history than what we're seeing unfold before us now.
Do you fear that we may come to a time when the churches may have to have armed guards?
Well, my church has had to have those kinds of measures before. As we took a stand for marriage in D.C., I had many death threats. People were putting my home address out. So I think we've been at that verge of that kind of thing for a moment. So yes, I think there's danger now unless we really begin to foster public unity. I am concerned.
Then, Bishop, about the minute or so that we have left, then, where does that begin? What would be your suggestion to get this started?
Well, I think three things have to happen. Right now, this summer, in urban areas, I think we need jobs for young people. I think also the church can come out in a unified fashion with prayer, vigils, etc. But the saving grace for every community that's having racial tensions long term may be the business community. We need to create opportunities for business, criminal justice folks, church leaders to come together and map out individual community plans. There's got to be a plan for Baltimore, got to be a plan for Charleston, where we can have safer cities. We can't protect ourselves from the one or two crazies that are going to rise up with arms, but we can deal with that ongoing anger in a systematic way. It will take time, but we got to start now.
We have been far too long as a nation, perhaps waiting for somebody else to do the job. Now we have to do the job together as a nation. Bishop Harry Jackson Jr., it is a pleasure to have you on the show. I thank you so much. Please stay safe, and we hope to talk to you again very soon.
Thank you for having me tonight. It's a great topic.
It's my pleasure. We continue.